I think I recognize everybody here. I've seen you all here before, so everyone's been here at least once. And if you've, right? I think they're fun. So I've done a lot of classes, so I'll kind of ramble a little bit here, tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Matthew Barlow. I've been with Earthworks for 13 years this April. It has been a really fun journey growing with this company. If you all have been shopping here long enough, you've probably noticed a lot of changes over time. The company started with two guys. One was in banking and finance and one was in insurance, and I think they just got tired of their desk jobs and they left their office jobs and started a lawn maintenance company of all things, and they bought some lawn mowers and some blowers and some edgers, and 30 years later, we have this really amazing spot here in town with a garden center, showrooms. So we're actually sitting in a brand new kind of a showroom, so we install everything that you see here. So we build these for clients and customers here in town. We do outdoor kitchens, the pergolas, we do lighting, water features, koi ponds, it's you name it, anything landscaping we do. So I actually just manage the garden center, so I'm not as knowledgeable about all of the landscaping, but I do know everything that we do. And so we are a full service company. And so it started with two guys, some lawnmowers, and then eventually they bought this property here and set up some tarps with some shrubs. And I think at first it was mainly just so that they would have some plants for their landscape jobs, because they're starting doing maintenance, but then people are asking them to plant things, and so it was just convenient to have their own plants and a little cheaper if they bought them themselves from the growers rather than buying them from someone here in town. So it has evolved, and then they eventually put the big building in. It's been fun to watch. I remember I was a shopper before I worked here, and they just had like a little trailer. It was like all dirt. They had a little trailer over the side by where the front entrance is, and it's completely changed. And Jacksonville's grown, so if you've lived here long enough, I mean, the topography, I mean, it's just, Beach Boulevard is like a highway now. I remember when it was just a couple lanes, to the beach. So we've seen a lot of changes, and fortunately we've been in a spot here where there's a lot of traffic and there's a lot of growth. We have a new neighborhood, Tamaya, across the way, so we're meeting new neighbors there all the time, which is really cool. So we're excited for this year. And then we have the greenhouse. So that is one of the newest additions, and I'm very excited about that. I have wanted a greenhouse literally for 13 years, and so when we were able to purchase that and set it up, it was literally like Christmas morning for me the day that we were setting it up. I was so excited, and I was chomping at the bit to bring some plants in to fill it. So let me tell you a little bit about kind of like from my perspective and the industry perspective on houseplants. So we're talking about houseplants. And I'm gonna try to demystify houseplants for you today. And I'm gonna come at it at a slightly different angle, so I hope you don't think I tricked you by the end of the class, but actually I'm not tricking you, but I really want to kind of shake our preconceived notions up about what houseplants actually are and what they are not, all right? So houseplants, from the industry perspective, things are changing very quickly. They're changing so fast that it's hard for the growers to keep up with what's currently fashionable, right? So plants have always been kind of like a fashion accessory in a lot of ways, right? They're kind of a reflection of an aesthetic that we like, right? And so when we fill our home or fill our gardens with plants, they are in some way a reflection of ourselves, right? So now we have social media, and we have Instagram, and we have millennials, right? And you put all those factors together, and then thinking about plants as fashion, I have seen kids come in with grocery lists. I've been doing this for over 20 years. I've never seen people with like grocery lists of plants that they've seen online, and they're coming in. I've heard people squeal before when they find a plant that's on their list, right? This is new to me. I am not used to this, right? The growers are not used to this, okay? So growers, they grow plants, they have crops, right? This is a farm, it's a business. They have projections based on previous years as to how many plants they should grow for each year, for each season, for each quarter, and they have it down to a science. If you've never seen a professional commercial greenhouse installation before, it is mind-blowing. They're like military complexes. They are run so efficiently. Now, these plants are in these controlled environments, right? And they're being taken care of by an army of ants, of humans, right? And machines and robots and timers and systems and computer programs, and these plants get the exact amount of water they need at the exact frequency. They get the exact amount of nutrients at the exact frequency. Okay, you see what I'm getting at? I mean, it is down to like the millisecond, okay, when they're getting their drip of whatever it is that they're being fed. And then they're in this controlled environment. There are no pests in there. There's no diseases. I mean, some of these places are like putting down, certain types of chemicals to make sure there's no insects even getting in there to begin with, and that funguses and different types of diseases are using products that preventatively keep the plants from even getting them, right? So in a lot of ways, and I use this analogy with just plants in general, but this is like plant nirvana, okay? It's even better than nature in some ways, right? Because even in nature, in a natural habitat for a plant, there's a lot of variables that these plants come across. A tree could fall and smash them and kill them, and they're dead just like that. Forget about disease, forget about pests, or maybe out in the jungle, a monkey comes by and wants to eat the leaves off the plant, right? They can't control that. So even nature isn't as pristine and as perfect as some of these greenhouses. So what I'm getting at is, don't be scared if your plants die, okay? Because you do not have, you can recreate that, but you do not have that kind of environment. Unless you guys are going to set up these programs on computers and drip lines and having all your plants being fed at exactly the right time and getting exactly the amount of water they need, they rely on us, right? So, but the first thing I'm going to try to do to demystify the idea of houseplants is that there is no such thing as a houseplant. There really isn't. There are plants. And then there are plants that we bring into our homes, okay? But there is no natural environment that is a home and a plant evolved in that environment. It's not real, okay? So you are going to kill plants. I'm going to just tell you that right now. Now, if you don't, I want you to fill out an application. And we are always looking for talented individuals. I've been doing this for a while. I've killed hundreds of plants. I may have even killed 1,000 plants by now. And I also study bonsai, and there's an old bonsai master who says you have not learned the first lesson until you've killed 10,000 plants. Or he said trees because he was talking about trees, but 10,000 trees. And there's a lot to that. There's a lot to that. Because we are afraid as humans to make mistakes. We're afraid to try new things. We're afraid to do things differently. We end up following the same patterns, and most of us are probably clinically insane because we do the same things over and over and we expect different results, right? So we are all insane, and as long as we're honest with ourselves, okay, we're starting to get to the next step in consciousness, okay? So what is a houseplant? Well, it's any plant that you bring in your house. That's a houseplant. I could talk about this for 10 hours and you guys could sit here and we could just have this awesome conversation, but I could probably also tell you everything you need to know in less than 3 minutes, okay? So let me tell you what I do. I bring all sorts of plants in my house, okay? If you look around here, probably at any given time, one of these plants has been a house plant in my house, okay? Hopefully that will start to get you thinking in a different way, okay? Now, some plants can tolerate being indoors longer than others, okay? Take that variable down. Some plants can tolerate being indoors longer than others. Some people can tolerate being indoors longer than others. I am not a house person, okay? So you look at some of like the old standards, like the Sansevieria. It used to be called mother-in-law's tongue. Now that's kind of an awkward phrase now, right? And then it's the snake plant. What I don't like about common names is that they can be confusing, right? So someone comes in from Canada and they ask for a certain plant. I've never heard of that common name. Well, luckily, we all have a tool, right? Okay, so I can find these weird common names that people call plants. We all have different names for different things. I can look it up and find it. But you look at a plant like this, I'm trying not to get off track here, but there's a reason why back in the 70s, and maybe probably before that back in the 50s, and maybe before that back in the 30s, or whenever these were first introduced. It's probably a 20-year cycle. These were popular. And there's a reason why, and this is in the same family, although it looks completely different, okay? There's a reason why these were standards for houseplants. There's a certain reason, because some plants can tolerate being indoors for longer periods of time. So what is it about certain plants that can tolerate being indoors for longer periods of time? Well, our house is a controlled environment in a way, in that it does not have humidity generally, right? Okay, so plants that evolved or are from a part of the world that's not very humid are probably generally going to do better inside, right? Humidity causes pressure around us, around plants. There's a pressure, okay? So plants, do any of you guys remember botany, like 101? Okay. All right, let me back up a little bit then, all right? So plants have roots. We don't see those usually because they're in dirt, okay? And they have leaves on the top, and some of them have branches, some of them don't. There's two major divisions in the plant world, monocots and dicots. And if you don't have a good grasp on that, it's a good place to start, okay? It's the major division between types of plants, branching plants and plants that don't really branch, simply put. So you're not going to see these guys making branches, okay, that you can prune and then they'll grow a new branch. They're not going to do that. Corn is another, bamboo is another, palm trees are another in the monocot, okay? Then you think about your shrubs, most of your deciduous and evergreen trees are dicots, branching type plants, okay? A lot of house plants are monocots. So there's some that are dicots, like the ficuses, they have branches, okay? But backing up to why I was even starting this, they have roots, they have a stem, they have some kind of leaf or a modified leaf. I mean, even cactuses have leaves. I mean, the spines were actually a very, very long time ago a leaf, but then as temperatures changed where these plants were planted in the ground, so plants can't move, so they had to stay in this place even though the environmental conditions changed, and they had to adapt to survive. So at one point, cactuses actually had leaves, and then the leaves got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller because plants lose moisture through their leaves, right? So in an arid environment, in a dry environment, if you have really big leaves, you have a lot of surface area that can lose moisture, right? Okay, so when you see big leaf plants, they're going to be, generally speaking, less happy indoors if there's low humidity, okay? Fortunately, on Amazon, you can, for as low as $19.99, and if you order it now, it might even be at your house by the time you get home. You can get like little $20 humidifiers that you can put around your big, lush tropicals and add a little bit of ambient humidity. If you want to take your houseplant keeping to the next level, humidifiers would be a great way to do that. And they're small, there's little portable ones, they're inexpensive, but humidity alone is one of the biggest factors as to why plants aren't happy indoors for a long period of time. So, because they have leaves that evaporate, so that's where the oxygen comes from too, right? So the plants give us oxygen, they take in carbon dioxide, but they're losing moisture. So it's like kind of like a circular, cyclical cycle. Moisture in through the bottom, moisture out through the top. If you were to put a giant bag over the top of a live oak tree, it'd be raining in there in no time. The water would be evaporating to the top of the bag and dripping back down on top of it. They're releasing thousands of gallons, big trees of water a day into the atmosphere, okay? So it's like if you leave your plants in your car overnight. Have you ever done that and gotten in there the next morning? None of you are that crazy? Some of you are? Like I'll load up my car full of plants for like a landscape job or something for the night before, and I go in there and it's just like a greenhouse inside my car. The next is just all fogged up because they're releasing moisture, right? But we don't see that. So that stresses the plant out, because if there's no pressure, if there's no humidity around them to help keep that moisture in, they're constantly just leaching moisture out, okay? That's why houseplants need to be checked on for water more frequently depending on the plant, because they lose their moisture so much quicker than they would outdoors where there's a pressure holding the moisture in. Does that make sense? Because that's a really important concept, okay? So some plants are better at releasing moisture, some don't release as much moisture. And the ones that have evolved in a more arid environment, things like the agaves, you also notice they have like waxier leaves, right? waxy. Waxy leaves are good at holding in moisture. These things are almost like plastic, you know, when you feel them, yeah? They're good at holding in moisture. Succulents, rubbery, plasticky, they hold in moisture really well. These big leafy guys are really good at releasing moisture. Because they also come from a very moist environment. A lot of these are rainforest type plants, right? And they can't hold on to that moisture, they gotta let it go, okay? All right, so now that you know that there's no such thing as a house plant, there really isn't. There's no such thing as a house plant. So keep that in mind. There is no spoon, there is no house plant. I have probably 60 or 70 different potted plants at home, and they are all at some point in their life and their relationship with me a house plant, okay? So the key to having the best looking, Instagram worthy, Photoshop, magazine is to have more than one house plant, okay? And then don't keep the plants inside all the time, okay? So they like to have recess. They like to go outside, okay? They like a little actual direct sunlight sometimes if they're a sun-loving plant, or you know, filtered light if they're a shade or a shade, but they like to be outdoors for a little bit of time, okay? So if you keep a plant inside, you know, a snake plant you can probably keep inside almost indefinitely. There are some extremes, okay? There are some extremes, but most plants, there's gonna be a decline and you're gonna notice it. And you could be doing everything right, but just because they're inside, they're gonna be slightly stressed out. Now the humidifiers will help. If you bring in the humidifiers, that's gonna help a lot. And you can actually lengthen the amount of time before you might actually start noticing stress, okay? But the phone comes in handy because it's the 21st century and there is no reason to wonder about anything, including the house plants in your care. You can know anything that you want to know in 2020, okay? So when people ask me, what tool do I use the most in gardening? I use my phone. This is I don't use my snips or a shovel, you know, or fertilizer. I fertilize, but I don't use fertilizer as often as I use my phone to figure stuff out, right? So if you have a plant in your care, look it up. Get to know as much about it as possible. The more you know about it, the easier it is to take care of it, because it's all about trying to replicate the situation in which it naturally occurs, okay? So if you have a desert plant, you want to replicate a desert as much as possible. If you have a tropical plant, are there birds playing? Yeah. The buntings, yeah. Cool. Yeah, I'm paying them about $40 for it. In birdseed, yeah. So, and if you have a tropical plant, you're gonna try to create a tropical environment as much as possible. People who grow orchids, for example, orchids need a lot of things. They need airflow and they need a good amount of humidity. So they actually make humidity trays. You guys can look those up too on whatever you're, wherever you like to shop. I don't have enough demand for them quite yet to stock them here, but they come decorative, they come just kind of utilitarian, but they're like a plastic tray, a couple, like an inch or so, inch and a half deep, and they have a plastic top that's like a grate, and you can set plants on top of it. You can keep water in there and it will evaporate up and around the plant. Something as simple as that if you don't want to get a humidifier. You can also do saucers, okay, like a deep saucer, okay, or a plate with an edge or a rim, and put pebbles in it and keep some moisture on there, and then put the plant on top of the pebbles. And so long as the plant's not touching the moisture itself and wicking that moisture up, that moisture is going to evaporate and keep more humidity around the plant. There are a lot of ways to have little micro pockets of humidity around your plants in your home, okay? So if you really do want to take it to the next level, you can do that if you are not willing to do what I'm going to suggest next. And so I was getting on to the idea that your plants like to have recess, they like to have time outdoors. So I literally once a week, because I'm kind of geeked out on it, I redecorate my home with my collection of plants. I literally swap them in and out. I don't have a plant in there more than 1 week at a time. And I have about a dozen spots in the house. And on the weekend, on my day off, I make a cocktail and I go outside and I figure out which plants are going to come in this week, and we have at it. And I swap them around, move them around. So, so I have, like, you know, tables and desks and dressers and counters and cabinets and all kinds of places where I put them. And I'm being conscious of the amount of light and where they're going, but because they're only going to be in there for a week, it doesn't really matter, okay? Because there are a few plants that may not be happy on 1 week, but 1 week is not very long, okay, for most plants to be indoors. So I just rotate them in and out. Now, some places I have like a pot that stays there, and I literally just take the plant from outside and set it in. Some of them are already potted, okay, but I have plates. So my plates, I have these plates I bought at IKEA. You can buy them anywhere, and the plates are my saucers, okay? So saucers are kind of hard to find sometimes. Unfortunately, the places where we buy pottery don't always provide saucers with them, but you can go to Target or Walmart or IKEA or wherever. You can find some really cool plates that are in the colors that you like, and you put those plates down, and those are your placeholders, and then you can just set your plants on top of those plates, and they hold the spot and make sure that whatever they're sitting on doesn't get, you know, any moisture from the bottom of the pot to what you're putting it on. So those are my placeholders. So I think really the secret to having those picture perfect houseplants, when you see them on Instagram and when you see them in magazines and when you see them on television, they have not been there necessarily for very long. They staged a photo shoot, okay? When you look at Southern living and you see those beautiful landscapes, a lot of times they just planted that stuff there, and they just planted big mature plants and they stuck them in the ground, they did a photo shoot, right? And then they probably pull them right back out again, okay? And so don't be fooled by camera magic, okay? And don't be like down and hard on yourself because you can't make your plants look as good as they do in the photo, because the ones in the photo have probably not been there very long. Now, there are some Instagrammers that are indoor gardeners and they're good at what they do. So yeah, there's probably a lot of that going on that's realistic. But at the same time, just know that you don't know what they're doing to get that effect, okay? You don't know if they're doing the rotating thing, right? You know, that philodendron, that really cool Swiss cheese or whatever it is that you're into, that you're looking at, you don't know how long it's been there. It could have been there a day, it could have been there 10 years. And if it was there 10 years, you don't know if it was in that same spot for 10 years. You don't know if it's been rotated in and out. So just know that it takes a little bit of practice, and it takes a little bit of experimentation and a little bit of trial and error, a lot of trial and error, okay? So if I put this ficus inside, and ficus can, you can master ficus. They can be a little finicky. They do like to have a little bit of humidity. And I put it in one spot and I leave it there for a month. And I don't really think about it again, right? Odds are that there's a lot of things that are happening and a lot of things that aren't happening, including me interacting with it, okay? So there's really no such thing as a green thumb. Yes, some people are passionate about plants, and the key to having a green thumb or to having happy plants is having an actual passion, because if you're not actually interested in it, you're probably not going to do very good at it, right? That's true for anything in life. If you're not actually interested in something, you're probably going to start it and then forget about it and move on to the next thing. But if you're actually kind of geeked out on it and you're like super interested in it, you're probably going to be very successful, because you're going to do all the things, you're going to learn all the things that you need to do to be successful, right? So if I put this in a spot, I get busy in life and I leave it there, it's probably not going to last for very long, okay? So the key to having a green thumb, number one, is having passion, actually being interested about this living thing, okay? It's alive, although it doesn't move, it doesn't talk, it doesn't pee on your carpet. See, the dogs and cats are easy to remember because they'll make noise and they'll remind you when they're hungry or they need to go outside, but the plants are not going to do that. It's up to you to show some interest, okay? So first of all, you're going to have a little bit of gas exchange, right? The plants like what we're giving, so just by talking to it and breathing on it, they love that and they get very excited. And if they could talk, they'd be talking dirty to you, right? Okay? That's the kind of thing that they're getting out of this, right? So they like the interaction. Now, it doesn't mean that I have to do something just because I'm interacting with it. I just need to interact with it. It likes all the molecules in the exchange. You know, we're all moving atoms, right? They like to have things around them. They like the space and the air changing and all these things that happen when we get close to them. Plants like that. It's been proven. They even like music too. Do some research. They like music. Certain types of music they like more than others. Okay, there are some styles that they don't like as much, and that's just a preference thing, but plants do have their preferences. So you guys can go online and find out what kinds of music they like. I will give you a clue. One style they really like is Baroque classical music, and I do too, so it works. Jazz is another good one, like really good jazz, like with vibraphones, you know, because of that wavelength, okay? So we are constantly Waves are passing through us all the time. Some waves are good, some waves are bad. I think a cell phone call just went through me about 10 seconds ago. But it's all about the vibration, okay? So you can do a lot of research into vibrations, but vibrations are happening. And so you have to be interested, number one, because if you're not interested, you might as well just walk out, like literally, like right now, just walk out, okay? Because you have to be interested. Okay, so that's the first key to successful anything in life. And then you have to interact. That's number two, okay? So in the house, we're set up with an advantage because at least the plants are closer to us. They're in our living space. The plants outside, good luck. We don't interact with those hardly ever, right? I don't even know how plants stay alive in people's gardens, really. So at least they're in the house, but then they become part of the fixture, right? They become part of the backdrop, which is why the concept of having a schedule where you rotate them, it brings them to your consciousness, right? It brings them to the forefront of your routine, okay? They become a part of your routine. That's very, very important to have a routine. We are all creatures of routines. We fall into habits and patterns that we create, and then sometimes we have to disrupt things in order to create new patterns and new habits. And so you literally, whatever it takes, hey Siri, remind me in 3 days to water my variegated ficus. It's that easy. I mean, we have a very powerful tool here, right? I am a forgetter. I forget everything, okay? So to set myself up for success, I have to create new patterns. And so whether it's the calendar on your wall or the day timer or the book or writing Sharpie on your hand or your Siri or your Alexa or whatever it is, set yourself up for success. Create a new pattern. You have to create that pattern. So I have a day off, and that's my day to play with my plants, okay? So passion, interaction, observation, okay? So if I'm looking at an object that I've never seen before, like a new piece of technology that baffles me, I may not know how to use that, right? I might have to read an instruction manual, okay? And men are notorious for not reading the instruction manuals, right? But if I don't know how to operate this thing, right, the chances of its success are much lower. So it's really good to figure out how to operate this thing, okay? It needs certain things, okay? We know it needs water, we know it needs food, we know it needs some form or some spectrum of sunlight, right? So get to know all those things. Read the owner's manual. I mean, you can know everything you need to know. There's no excuse on the information that's available, right? So you have to interact, you have to observe, but if you're observing it and you don't know what the signs are, right? That's another chunk of knowledge that you're gonna have to wrap your heads around. But the plants will communicate to you. I mean, yellow leaves are like having a headache though. I mean, I have a headache this morning. Why? I'm not gonna tell you, but it's just a warning sign, right? Yellow leaves means something's going on. Alert, alert, okay? It could be too much water. It could be not enough water. It could be that a disease is starting to take hold. It could be a fungus, it could be bacterial, it could be a virus. Fortunately, bacterials and viruses are not as common. It's a good thing because we really don't have medicines for that. Funguses we can work on, and insects, we have tools for that. So you have to be passionate, you have to interact, you have to observe, you have to know what signs to be looking for, okay? These are all things that people who have green thumbs do. A lot of them just kind of do it naturally. That's why they say some people have a green thumb, is because they just are naturally that way. And if you're not naturally that way, then you have to create new habits and new patterns in order to make that part of your natural routine. So, because I'm a forgetter and because I'm easily distracted, because I know myself, I have to set myself up for success. I have to, so for example, if I want to remember to bring my lunch to work, I put my keys on my lunch in the refrigerator because that's how forgetful I am in the morning, okay? But I know that about myself. I know myself well enough that I have set myself up for success. If I'm gonna bring my lunch, I'm gonna put my keys on top of my lunch. So with that said, you have to set yourself up for success with the plants too. And so if you don't have the chops, at least don't have the chops right away, don't buy a plant that's going to be high maintenance, right? A lot of times we'll buy a plant that needs a lot of attention, okay? Or it needs very, very specific types of things to keep it happy, okay? Start with something easier. This guy here is also another type of Sansevierias. So Sansevierias are fun. So even if you don't like the old-fashioned traditional form, there are some really cool forms, right? Even look at this guy. Just pass this one around. This is called the Samurai. It's a little pokey on the end, so be careful. But I could probably put this in a closet for like a month, 2 months, come back, and more than likely it's going to look exactly the same, all right? So if you're just starting to dive into this, the Sansevierias are a really, really good place to start. And they're fun to touch too. They have really cool textures. They're just awesome plants, and they like it. I mean, they like it when you are interested in them. So, but this has I mean, it's striking. It's a striking plant, and you could literally almost consider it artificial. It's not quite there, but it's pretty darn close. All right. So rotating your plants in and out. So if you are starting slowly and you're just biting off a little bit at first, 2 plants, 1 spot in the house. One's outdoors while one's indoors. And the only time that they get to interact is when they're passing by each other, right? 1 in, 1 out, 1 in, 1 out. Try that for a while, especially if you've been struggling a little bit or you haven't quite been able to keep the plants looking the way that you want them to. Just start rotating them in and out, okay? Now, not everyone has an ideal situation for the in and out, okay? So then you're gonna have to start thinking about other things like what we talked about earlier. Maybe a little bit of humidity is all it's gonna take for that plant to be a little bit happier. But really the interaction, the observation is the key. Now, plants also like to have nutrients. A lot of times we forget nutrients. I was gardening for a very long time before I started using nutrients. I use some slow release nutrients and sometimes I use liquid nutrients. But I prefer liquid nutrients, and I think plants probably do too. And I'll tell you why. Okay, so the shake and feeds, they're fine, but they're slow release, right? And they're designed depending on the brand and the formulation and all these things. I mean, it could be days, weeks, or months. It's just a very, very slow drip. And I know that when I'm hungry, if I was fed that way, I'd be pretty cranky, okay? Here's a bite of toast. 4 hours, you'll get another bite of toast, okay? And then in 2 hours, you get a little squirt of mustard. I mean, I'm not gonna be very happy, okay? So it works, and it's good. It is good, okay? But remember that we're putting our plants in a less than ideal situation, meaning that they're not outdoors, okay? Less than ideal. They're gonna be a little more stressed, a little more cranky, and I would probably prefer to get my nutrients on a more frequent basis and be able to absorb them immediately, okay? So liquid or water soluble, this is just the blue stuff. I don't carry Miracle-Gro, I carry Jax. Jax has some extra minerals in here, minerals that you'll probably recognize like boron, copper, iron, manganese, molybdenum, zinc. I mean, these are all nutrients that we need, like in a multivitamin, they're the same thing. Plants, animals, we all need the same things. It's kind of crazy. And when we eat plants, we get those nutrients from them, right? So if you want to eat your house plants, I would recommend a little bit of ranch and maybe some seasoning. But no, I mean, they need the same stuff we do. So, and they have these pots, right? And the pots have some kind of growing media in there, but they'll only hold on to nutrients for so long. I mean, what doesn't pass through, the plant's gonna absorb and it's gonna use it, and then it's not there anymore. It doesn't stay there, right? You put it in, it's either leaving or it's getting used by the plant and then it's not there. It's not like you just one and done, like you feed it and it's there, you're good. No, it's not like that. It's like an oil change too. You have to do those every so often, right? I think I was 21 before I realized I had to change it every so many months, right? So I would use a liquid, I'd use a water soluble, and the main reason is it's liquid and it's water soluble, so when it's in that mixed with water, the plant can absorb it right away. And this is super crucial, and all these things kind of, I mean, this goes for plants outdoors too. I mean, when a plant's stressed out and you put a slow release fertilizer on it, it could be a long time before that plant gets the nutrients it needs to recover. So if I'm sick and I go to the doctor and he gives me a medicine that's going to take 3 months or whatever for it to kick in, I'm gonna go see another doctor. Like, I want something now to help me feel better. So it's the same with our plants. So if you have stressed plants and you put that shake feed down, it's gonna work eventually, it's gonna get it. But what if it doesn't rain, or what if you don't have irrigation going off? So I just put my measurement into my, it's like a 2-gallon pressure pump sprayer, fill it with water, and then I walk around to all my plants, I take them outside and I'll squirt, 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 and I spray the foliage, okay? So the foliage is actually where the plants want the nutrients, okay? That's where they're wanting to put them, okay? So the roots take up the nutrients and they turn into food and they put it up to the top, okay? But the roots don't actually need it. It's the foliage and the branches, it's the top of the plant that needs it, okay? So the tops of the plants, as we know, are the solar panels, right? And they capture the energy. That energy gets sent down to the roots so that they can make the food and then send it back up to the top. So it's going back and forth, okay? So you can relieve your plant of a little bit of its burden by putting the food right at the top where it wants it. So plants like to have a foliar spray of nutrients, and you will notice, especially if you're trying to get something to grow and you're wanting to get it bigger, the liquid fertilizer is going to help you achieve that, okay? So it's going to help the plants grow faster. It's going to help them do all the things that you are expecting them to do, like grow or make flowers or another branch or another leaf or whatever it is. The nutrients are going to enable the plant to do that. So if it is not well fed, it will be a slow decline, or it'll be a fast decline. I mean, every plant's different, and so I'm just speaking in generalities here, but every plant has a different level of tolerance, and some plants need more nutrients than others, okay? Now you can get really, really geeked out on fertilizers, and if you go online, I don't carry all the fertilizers that are out there. I mean, there are hundreds of variations and different formulas, but just to start, a balanced feed is the best way to start. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. So this happens to be a 20-20-20. It could be a 10-10-10 or a 5-5-5 or a whatever. But that's just a nice balanced feed. It's going to give the plants everything they need to grow and thrive. I'll go over what the nutrients do, just because it might not be common knowledge, okay? So the first number is nitrogen, okay? First number is nitrogen. These numbers actually represent an actual nutrient. Nitrogen is the first number. Nitrogen is responsible for growing, okay? For the plant getting bigger. So if that's all you want the plant to do, you could find a fertilizer with a high first number and lower other numbers, okay? And it'll put the focus on the growth, okay? Second number is phosphorus, okay? Phosphorus is the middle number. Phosphorus is responsible for the root system growing larger, stronger, more efficient, more effective at what it does, and also responsible for flower production, okay? Plants use phosphorus for roots and for flowers. So if you have a plant that you have overwatered, okay, if it's staying wet, I used to do it. I used to only have one plant in my house, and I loved it to death. Literally, loved it to death. I watered that thing every time I looked at it. Put ice cubes in it, had my little water cup, and I just, a little, they hate that. And we'll go into watering here in a little bit. They hate that. If they could talk, and it's a good thing our plants can't talk, because we would be abused, I'm telling you. The way we treat them, they give it right back to us. So, and the last number is potassium, okay? And potassium is kind of like an immunity nutrient. It also helps the cell walls stay more rigid and stronger. So plants that are a little droopy and flopping, a high last number, okay, can help repair the cell walls of that plant. Now, if it's cracked or bent, I mean, it's not going to fix that. But plants that are kind of long and leggy would appreciate. But when you use the balanced feed, there's plenty of that in there for it, okay? So feeding your plant is very important, super important, not even an option, okay? Not even an option. You're gonna be surprised if you have not fed your plants regularly, you're gonna be surprised at how they respond. This formula here, if you use it as recommended, you can use it once a week. Use it once a week and see what happens. You might be very surprised. Now, for slow growing plants like Sansevierias, you might not notice quick explosive growth like you might with other fast growing plants, but it is going to speed it up, okay? And for a slow growing plant like that little Samurai, I don't know where it ended up, this thing is excruciatingly slow growing. And I want mine to be really big, because when they're big, they are really cool, okay? So I'm gonna feed this every week so I can grow this as quickly as possible, because I'm only gonna be on the planet for so long, okay? This thing could probably outlive most of us. They're so cool. And I have one now, I bought it that size, and mine now is like this, and that's like 4 years. So, I mean, it doesn't happen very quickly. But when you see a new leaf forming, I'm very excited. I get my camera out, my phone, and I'm taking pictures, and I'm posting it. I'm very excited about it. I share it with all my friends who could care less because I don't get any likes. Right? Why aren't they excited about my houseplants?
You're finding the wrong people.
Right? Yeah. There can only be one plant nerd in each group of friends, right? And all my friends are like, whatever, like, I don't care. Maybe he'll shut up and stop taking pictures of him. Okay, so watering is actually very simple. We all know that waterboarding is cruel and unusual punishment. Do not waterboard your plants, they hate it. Okay, do not torture your plants with water. God, you know, there's a lot of like myths and things and rules of thumb and this, that, and the other, but let me tell you this. 99 out of 100 plants like to be watered, they like to dry out, and then they like to be watered again. Now, how long between that point when they dry out and getting the next water, that's the magic right there, okay? So if you had like a little probe in there that sent out a little beeping sound as soon as it dried out, that'd be awesome. If one of you guys can invent that and market it to me, I'll buy it and we'll sell it here, okay? That might even be out there already. I just haven't seen one, but that'd be really cool. So they want to be watered, they want to dry out, and then they want to be watered again. Now there are a few exceptions. So if your plant in your house evolved in the rainforest of Burma or wherever, they're probably gonna want a little more water. If your agave that you bring in for no longer than maybe a week at a time in your house, okay, stays wet, it is going to die. It is going to die. Its roots do not have the ability to withstand the onslaught of being constantly moist. They did not evolve in that kind of situation. They evolved. Have anyone seen pictures of the desert? If you haven't been to the desert, you guys have a concept of what the desert is like. It is dry. They might get an inch of rain. You know how many rain, any of you know how much rain we get here in Florida? Just as a side note, we got like 4 feet last year. That's a lot of water, okay? So you scratch your head when your plants outside that evolved in a very dry area are dying. You can do everything right, but you can't control the rain. We get 4 feet of rain, that plant has no chance. Has no chance. And I sell a lot of those plants that have no chance, but it's up to you to give them a chance, right? So I do a lot. As I've become a more mature gardener, so to speak, I have done more and more container gardening because then I can control the variables a little bit more. All of a sudden, these plants are portable, right? So if I'm going to get a month of rain in July, which we very well might again, I can bring that cactus up under the eaves for a month, or bring it indoors for a time, and then back under the eaves or under a porch or whatever, or in and out every day, you know, if I have to, because it doesn't want to be inside, but it doesn't want to be wet either. You know, there are things that we have to do, okay? And if we don't do them, then the plant will die. I guarantee it. It will die. Even if everything else we're doing right. The water is so elemental when it comes to the success of your plants. So plants that like to be dry need to stay dry, and plants that like more water need to be watered. So it's about figuring out and kind of getting into that pattern, okay? So a lot of people ask me the question, this is like the number one question, I get it all the time, and my answer might sound a little flip, but they ask me, how often do I water this? I'm like, well, when it dries out, when it needs it. That's the answer. It's up to us to figure it out, because everyone's variables are different, okay? Everyone's variables are different. So I could give just water it once a week, but that could be too much, or that could be too little, okay? It's up to us, once they're in our care, to figure out how often do they dry out, okay? And each plant's gonna be different. I can't treat all these plants the same way. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that I did when I first started getting into growing plants indoors, I would just water them all at the same frequency, in the same amount, and so on and so forth, okay? So it's about getting to know the plant. It's about having a relationship with a plant. It is a relationship. A happy plant is in a relationship, right, with you, okay? It is a relationship. It's a bond. I have some plants I've had like 20 years now. It's about how long I've been into this. And they're still alive and they're still in containers for over 20 years. I have a pomegranate that I am very fond of, and it came back to me. Without giving too much information, it left in a relationship. When the relationship ended, she felt guilty and it came back. But I have this dwarf pomegranate and it came back to me, and I was like, oh my God. And it's happier now with me, I guarantee it. It is very happy now. It's got so much new growth. I got it in just the right spot where it's getting the right amount of sun. If we get rain for a week, I'll bring it up, if I see that, bring it up under the house. So if you're doing patio gardening with containers and indoor and you like this idea of moving things in and out, it's all about getting them in the right spot. Here's another OCD thing I do, because I have to, because the plants require it. I have a patio that in the winter gets a lot of sun because of the way the sun shifts, right? In the summer it doesn't get as much. So I have an L shape, I wish you guys can see it, but I have a patio with like a pergola, and so some parts of the year it gets a lot of sun, other parts not. So I probably have 100 plants in training. So I train bonsai, and I will literally move them, like every one of them, to a different position with the seasons too. Okay, so it's not a static thing. Okay, so you may even have to, from one time of year to the other, put them in a different position on your patio. So keep that in mind too, because the sun does shift. And you have to, not everyone's patio will have that dramatic, but just because of the way it's facing, winter and summer are almost polar opposites with the amount of sun I get on my patio. So I do a complete shift. And I imagine my plants thanking me, and so that is worth it, right? I have to imagine that because they're not going to say it. But they show me that they're happy. They show me that they're happy. That's the reward, I guess, right? So they don't tell us, we don't get those little pats on the back or, you know, the kind words, but they are healthy and they're doing the things that they want to do and are able to do the things that they want to do because we are providing that environment for them. Am I boring you guys yet? Okay. So like I said, I could talk about this like literally for like 8 hours. You guys probably, within all of that babble, have heard everything you need to know. But the key really comes down to the passion, the interaction, the observation. Those are the big ones, okay? Everything else will come in. If you're doing those three things, if you're passionate about your plant, if you're interacting with your plant, and you're observing it, okay? So you can't be inside the house drinking a cup of coffee and looking through the window and seeing that plant out there, you know, 20, 30 feet away. That's not gonna cut it. I mean, you gotta get up on the plant. I mean, you got to be intimate with this plant. You gotta be looking for warning signs. You have to look underneath the hood. You gotta look underneath the leaves. There's a lot of insects that will hide underneath the leaves. I have watched bugs. So bugs notice movement, okay? So they're used to having to hide from birds and all kinds of things that are gonna come and grab them, right? So they see motion, there'll be a bug right here, right in eye shot, and I come close enough and it'll go, and it'll just go right underneath the leaf and hide. Seriously. And they see you before you see them a lot of times coming outside, because they see differently than we do, but they see motion very well. A lot of animals, insects, they see motion really well. And so they are conditioned to hide as soon as something comes that could eat them, okay? So if you're just looking at the top of your plant, you could have 100 bugs underneath there just sucking the sap right out of that leaf. And you're not gonna know until that leaf starts turning yellow and brown and it's too late and you have to cut it off, okay? So you have to get intimate. You have to look at your plants. And plus this plant I'm noticing is a little dusty right now, so maybe I'll get some water and give it a little bath, right? Okay? So there's all kinds of things that just by getting close to your plants, interacting with them, but just because you're getting close, I'm gonna reiterate this, doesn't mean you have to necessarily do anything. Okay, so that's the biggest temptation, is that you have to do something to it. That's why it's, if you have it's almost like having like a only child syndrome, right? They get all that love, all that attention, they're really spoiled, right? Same thing with the plant. I mean, if you only have one plant to give attention to, you're probably going to kill it with love. It's very easy. I mean, the odds are much higher you're going to kill it with love. So have multiple plants so you can spread that love around, right? So just a little love for this one, little love for this one, little love for this one, right? So that way you're less dangerous to the plant. They're like, leave me alone, okay? Are there any questions? Is there anything in the back?
What about light? When it's kind of dark, I think that's my problem.
Not enough light. Okay, so fortunately there's a product called a grow light. I have a employee here. He doesn't work for me. He's not my employee. You guys follow them on Instagram. They're at the Hoya Hunters, Hoya Hunters, at the Hoya Hunters. They got so many followers already, but they have turned their whole guest room into a plant room, and they have grow lights. And so at night, it looks like there's an alien mothership coming out of their house. I kid you not. And he showed me a picture the other day. I was like, dude, I go, you're that neighbor, aren't you? Because the people across the street gotta be so pissed at him because that light is just like, I don't know if you guys seen the grow house on by the Intercoastal in Atlantic. It's like that, coming out of his house. It's just like, he's like, yeah, man, my cooling bill has gone, my electric bill is like so high right now because it's like 90 degrees in there if I don't turn on the, the AC like all the way like to 60 or something like that. I'm like, dude. But he's like, him and his wife, man, they're just like taking over the top. Did you have a question?
Soil.
Soil.
For the agave, I assume is different than what you.
So, okay, so soil is important. Soil is a big factor. Water, nutrients, soil, okay? If you want to just have one soil, you can do that, okay? So a premium potting soil, okay, something like one of the Fox Farm brands, I would probably recommend just as a generic soil. If you're just to pick one, you can just pick like the Happy Frog Fox Farm. I use that for most of my plants, but I am very, very conscious about the watering. It's more so the watering a lot of times, okay? So there are like cactus mixes you can buy, and I sell a cactus mix, and it's fast draining, okay? So if you want to specialize that a little more, you can get like the cactus blend, okay? Or you can buy a potting soil and add sand. And you can find sand right underneath our sod here. I mean, our soil is pretty sandy. You could also mix in like pea gravel, small gravel, okay? Rocks, okay? Put a layer of rocks in the bottom for your cactuses and things that like to dry out. So before you pot it, put it like a couple inches, depending on the size pot. The bigger the pot, the more gravel you put in, okay? So that way you're ensuring that water is moving through there as quickly as possible for your plants that like to stay dry. So that would be true for your sansevierias as well, okay? Gravel, maybe some sand, then some potting soil, or mix it all up. You can do that as well. But it's really, yes, the soil is important, but we're putting the inputs in with the nutrients, okay? So the soil doesn't matter as much with the nutrients because we're the input for that, okay? But it is important with how long it stays wet or how long it stays dry. But a professionally blended, the Fox Farms are premium. They've been blended to stay wet evenly wet if you water them more often, but they're also blended to stay evenly dry if you're watering them, appropriately less often. Does that make sense? Okay, so as long as you're buying a premium brand name, I would not buy any of those soils that have like the moisture balls in them that hold moisture, and then those things are crazy. So I went to a person's house, and you know how much rain we get sometimes, and they had put that into one of their pots, and we had like a week of rain, and it was like these big giant like gelatin, like jellyfish like coming out of their pot because they'd all risen to the surface because it had stayed wet for like a week, and we got like a foot of rain that week, and it was terrible. It was a nightmare. So in our climate, unless you have it in a controlled environment, and even then I wouldn't recommend any soils that they put those moisture beads in there, and it'll say on the top like moisture something or another. I don't even sell them. I like to be in control. So since we're talking about house plants and potted plants and container plants, I like to be in control of the watering. So I use a premium potting soil, and so long as I'm watering at the appropriate rate, that potting soil is perfect for just about any plant. Just about any plant. It's really more about the frequency of when it gets the moisture. Yep. But yes, go ahead.
That hanging plant behind you? No, the hanging plant.
Oh yes, the pothos.
I get that a lot, and my problem is I'm always getting those white powdery thing, and then the leaves will start to curl. What?
The white things are probably the insect,
Yeah.
like the mealybugs.
Oh, yeah, the mealybugs.
Mealybugs,
Control that.
well, might have to make the plant poisonous. So I sell some little pellets that you can sprinkle in there, and when you water it, or if it's outdoors when it rains, it dissolves, the plant absorbs it, and it makes the plant poisonous to insects. Okay, so when that insect, what they do, most of our houseplant insects are sap suckers. Okay, so they attach themselves, they're like vampires, literally. They attach themselves to the plant and they suck the sap right out of it. Okay, so if the plant was poisonous, so if you put those little granulars in there, and once they dissolve, they begin to dissolve, the plant absorbs it. I think they usually last like 3 months, 6 months. You'll have to read the package, I can't remember. But then when they suck on it, it'll kill them.
So you sell it here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and there's all kinds of, but it's basically you're getting into the realm of one or two things. Okay, so if you're having problems with mealybugs, they can destroy plants, and if they populate, okay, so they don't like moisture, mealybugs, and a lot of these insects don't like moisture. So when they're in the house, they love it
Yeah.
because they don't get wet. That's like
I don't
perfect.
Get it outside.
No.
Yeah, but when I put it inside.
Right. So it's that dry environment. So simply by taking it outside, spraying it. So taking the hose and not like full blast, but spraying it pretty hard, you can knock some of them off. But just by getting them wet, you can kill them because they don't like getting wet. Getting wet doesn't necessarily kill them, but they. You can also, if it's in the house, you can also use. I also sell the. It's called insecticidal soap. It's basically just like a thick oil, and these insects you can smother them. So they breathe through their shells, okay? And so by putting that oily or soapy mixture on them, it will smother them. And that works well too.
Somebody mentioned.
Yeah, any kind of soap. So you can use simply soap for a lot of these insects. So you put in soap into a squirt bottle and then shake it up, and it's pretty thick. Make sure it's kind of thick. You put several squirts in there, or squirt, whatever, but pretty soapy, and then you can spray the insects, and that will smother them. And you might have to do it a couple times, but if you don't want to deal with chemicals and poisons, which, especially if you have cats who like to get in and around the plants, you might not want to have poisonous granules on your plants. So the soaps are very mild but effective. You just have to use them more often. Yeah.
Thank you.
So you talked about rotating plants.
Yes.
Could plants go into shock by doing that?
Could the plants go into shock? That's a good question. If you are putting them, and there's a lot of variables to that question, but you could. So what you're going to want to do when you rotate them, you're not going to want to put something that has been in the deepest shade or a shade lover into the sun ever, whether it's indoors or out, okay? So as long as they have a similar light condition, the chances of them shocking are very low, especially if they've only been in a week. That's not very long. Now, some plants don't like to be moved, like orchids. That can stress them out, okay? So do a little research. I mean, I can't go into every single plant and every single detail. A lot of this is on you, and luckily you guys all usually have smartphones or know someone who does, but get to know your plant. Do keyword searches. Does this plant like to be moved, okay? Some plants don't mind at all. Some plants might even prefer being moved. And then some plants, once you set them, it takes a lot of energy for them to position themselves. So plants, you ever seen the time-lapse videos of leaves moving toward the sun? It's so cool. If you haven't done that, just type in time-lapse, leaves, plants moving, something like that. Watch videos. I could watch that for days on end. I could geek out on time-lapse videos and plants are some of the coolest thing. Do like time-lapse on a vine growing. Do like keyword like time-lapse, ivy or vine growing up a tree. There's a really cool one I think BBC did or the World. I can't remember which one it was, but it just shows how the vine moves up. It's so wicked. And you're like, well, of course these things are alive. Of course, these things are almost like animals, right? I mean, we've learned a lot about plants. You guys want a little bit of some nerdy information on some of the cutting edge stuff on plants? Okay, so there is a scientist, and I forget her name, but she had this idea and she had this theory that plants, unlike humans and other animals, aren't as competitive as we thought. Sometimes we project how we are onto other living things, right? We do that with our dogs and our cats, but we also do that in the plant kingdom too. So what we have found out in short is that plants are very, very cooperative, okay? And they also have a friend in a type of fungus. It's called mycorrhizae, and there's several different types of mycorrhizae. Have you guys ever seen the movie Avatar? Okay, remember that movie? Watch it again after hearing this talk, and it'll blow your mind in another way, okay? So, mycorrhizae is a fungus that does not make a mushroom. If you go into the forest right now and get underneath the leaf litter, you're gonna see in a healthy area lots of little white threads, okay? That happens right at the leaf litter level. That's one type of fungus. And then right below the surface, where the surface roots are, there's another type, okay? The mycorrhizae connects like a spider web, literally every plant in the forest. Every plant in the forest is connected, literally connected. Even the plants on the other side are connected to the plants on this side through the root system, through the mycorrhizae. The mycorrhizae, if you understand the idea of a broker is like a middleman. So I can use a broker to bring plants in. They don't grow the plants, but they can get them for me. They can make my job easier. They can bring them in from all over the place, aggregate them together, and get them to me, okay? So the mycorrhizae is like a broker. They broker nutrients. How do we find this out? Okay, so what she did was she put radiocarbon around, she put a bag around these small plants, and she made them basically radioactive, okay? So she could follow nutrients, okay, with instruments through the plants, through the roots, and as they move through the forest, and so she could follow them. And what she found is that plants exchange nutrients. It's amazing. So one plant has too much of this. Hey, I got a little extra nitrogen, Birch. What do you need? I can use a little phosphorus. All right. Mycorrhizae comes into play, and the mycorrhizae brokers it through the plants. It's amazing. Now, here's what's even cooler. There are hierarchies. There are certain relationships. They even, I mean, it goes into like, some plants have certain types of relationships and others have other types of relationships. And like a tree that's evergreen, okay, and a tree that loses its leaves, okay? So a tree drops its leaves. It doesn't need any nutrients right now. So Mr. Evergreen over here is like, I'm still got all my leaves. And so that deciduous tree, if it's got a little extra, we'll send some over to the evergreen tree, okay? So there's that going on. And then what I thought was the coolest, there's also relational brokering going on. So you look at a giant oak tree in the forest, and then off over here, there's another oak tree, and off over there's another oak tree. More than likely, was an acorn, right, that fell from the big mother tree over there. Well, somehow, and this is starting to get a little philosophical here, but somehow the mycorrhizae and these trees know which one is related to who, because the baby plants from the mother plant or the father plant get first dibs. She was able to prove that. They get first dibs before it goes to anybody else. So we're still trying to figure out how it knows that. So you may think of other living creatures on the planet a little bit differently, hopefully, after hearing that. Okay, so every time you kill a plant, have a funeral. Because I think they're a little more conscious, but just in a different way than we are, okay? So there's all sorts of different types of intelligences out there, and I think that we think our type of intelligence is the most important. I tend to disagree about that. So it's just good to be respectful and to honor, you know, these other living things that we take into our care. They're just different than us, right? They're just different. They're a different type of creature and different type of being. So anyway, do some Googling on some of those things I talked about. I wish I had specific names, but I'm not that personality type. I don't remember the names. But if you need help finding those, there's like a TED Talk. She did a TED Talk on that, on the relationships of plants. But it's just so cool to know. So unfortunately, and I'll end on this, your houseplants are in an unnatural situation. They're not going to be able to experience that kind of a relationship with another plant, which makes me sad in some ways, right? Because we're kind of denying them that. But then again, they wouldn't even be here for all kinds of other reasons. I mean, they wouldn't even be, this plant wouldn't even be here if there wasn't the houseplant industry, okay? And so just know that its cousins in the Congo or wherever this thing came from are experiencing that. Any more questions before I end? Yes?
Well, one question I have is the weather, especially in the wintertime. I can see in the summertime and, you know, getting them outside and inside, but what about when it's getting colder? You're going from a warmer house to colder weather. Do you not rotate when it's cold?
Well, fortunately, are you a Floridian?
No, I've
Okay.
lived here most of my life.
Okay, but you're sounding like a Floridian because you use the word cold, and you're referring to Florida, right? Where I grew up, it didn't get cold till it was like 0 degrees. Then people started complaining, like literally. But no, I see what you're saying. I'm just teasing. But we really don't experience temperatures low enough to cause that much of an issue, okay?
We hit freezing.
Right, right. And you'll be surprised, a lot of our houseplants, if not all of them, do tend to lean toward a tropical, more cold sensitive plant. That's just kind of the nature of most houseplants. There are exceptions. But as hopefully after today you may have broadened your definition of what a house plant can be, that agave over there can take cold that we'll never have in Florida, okay? So there are going to be lots of exceptions to that. But yes, you do want to be mindful. So it's 70 some degrees in your house, and you're not going to maybe want to rotate that week or whatever when it's like 32. But really 32 is the actual magic number where the damage happens. 33 is miles away from 32. 33 miles away. 34 is like 100 miles away from 32. And every degree above freezing, miles away. Okay, so you kind of start thinking of it that way. So I have a very precarious decision to make every time it gets close to freezing here. I freak out. I don't freak out, but I'm like, oh my God, I got a lot of work to do to protect these plants. So you can imagine having a handful of house plants to protect a home. We have thousands of plants out here, and you even see some frost cloth over there on those hibiscus. And I brought some things in the greenhouse. But every degree is a big difference, okay? So keep that in mind. 32 is what causes the damage because that's when things freeze. So what happens when leaves freeze, there's moisture in there. They freeze and it expands, okay? This is a paper thin leaf, and if all the moisture in there expands, I mean, just a fraction of a millimeter is a big expansion, and it's going to burst the cells, and it's going to be mushy. That's what happens. Is they expand, they freeze and expand. So plants that can take cold weather, that evolved in cold climates where there's freezing, they actually have an antifreeze. Believe it or not, it's an antifreeze, a chemical inside of them that keeps that damage from happening. And they have that built into them because they have been in that situation. But plants that evolved in the jungle have never had a reason to develop an antifreeze in their chemistry, so to speak. Any other questions? Yes.
You suggested to spray the foliage.
Yes,
when you're
spraying the foliage.
watering.
Yep.
I thought that can drown the leaves or like damage them.
Okay, so there are going to be a few exceptions. So fuzzy leaves that have fuzz or texture on them, probably would prefer not. But so long as they dry out quickly and they're not staying wet, it's the staying wet that would cause the problem, okay? And the waxier the leaf is, the more it's just going to shed off anyway, right? And it's going to dry out rather quickly. So fuzzy leaves, and we have this issue a lot in Florida with a lot of the vegetables we grow, like cucumbers have fuzzy leaves, tomatoes have fuzzy leaves. And when we have rain after rain after rain, and they stay wet, they stay moist, funguses grow on them very quickly, and they just evaporate. So no. So think about, what happens in nature. It rains, and they get wet. It's okay. You just don't want them to stay wet. Yes, ma'am.
So for your potted plants, do you freshen the soil?
Okay.
Do you take out
Yes.
old and put in new?
Yes, okay. So she's asking about refreshing the soil. That is important. I know a person, and I'm not going to name their name, but they have a torture chamber. They have a horticultural torture chamber in their home. And they have these plants. I mean, I've walked into this home before, and there's like what used to be like an indoor tree, and it's got one leaf on it, and it's just, I could see it just kind of hanging. And then it's just so close. Like, this person is able to keep their plant at just barely alive. It is crazy. They have such a passion, but they're so terrible at it. And every plant is just on the very cusp of going over the cliff into death. And how they're able to keep them that close between life and death, I don't know. I think it'd be actually harder to do that. And there's like crust growing on the top of the soil. I mean, these plants have been in there for like 10, 15, 20 years in this just state of like barely alive. Like I picture like medieval torture chambers with these guys, and you can see all their ribs, and they maybe get one spoonful of porridge every day just to barely keep them alive. That's what's happening in this house. But what she actually does is she overwaters everything. Okay, so what happens is, so here's watering. Here's another big no-no. Just topping it off a little. Okay, you want the water to run out through the plant. That's important for flushing the soil. Okay, our water from our tap is terrible. Have you ever seen the ingredients? You ever seen that from JA when they send you like the water? Oh God, it's crazy all the stuff that's in there. So who knows what kind of pharmaceuticals we're giving our plants these days, right? Very low doses of maybe some anti-anxiety stuff, you know, because of our culture here. But no, but so what happens is if we're just topping it off and the water never runs out, those things build up in the soil, right? So if you're just doing the ice cube thing, like a lot of people say the ice cube thing with the orchids and plants, then it's never running through. And so there's all kinds of minerals in our water, which are fine if they get flushed, but you can have an iron, like too much iron in your soil if it never flushes, or too much of a good thing. A lot of these things that are in our nutrients that plants need, if they become too high, they become toxic, just like anything. I mean, anything can be toxic in the wrong amount. Okay, so flushing the soil is very crucial. So that's number one. So watering your plants so that the water runs out. When you water them, make sure the water runs out the bottom. You're flushing it, you're getting any buildups, anything out of it, okay? Now, when do you repot a plant? I generally will repot a plant before it becomes pot bound. So root bound, pot bound means that at some point you have more root than you do soil in the pot. Okay, that's when you're getting into pot bound, root bound. That's what that means. Okay, so the ratio of root to soil, there's more root than there is soil. That's not good. Okay, the longer that goes, I mean, I've pulled plants out for people in pots that there is no soil in there. Okay, that's crazy. And so they're going to need a lot more water. They're going to need fed a lot more. And if nothing changes, if you're not increasing water, you're not increasing nutrients, plants can technically live without soil, but you're gonna need to feed it like very, very regularly. Yeah. You're gonna have to get intimate with your plants. You're gonna have to get intimate and take.
I mean, if it's in a pot, you can see the root.
No. So you're gonna have to get your fingers in there. So
That's root bound.
no. So this is a misconception. A lot of people, when they see roots around the edges, they think that's root bound, but there is more soil than root in here. Okay. So in a pot, roots in nature, they spread away from the plant. So when they do that here, what happens? They hit the edge, they have nowhere to go. So they're on the surface. They're on the surface. So surface roots are fine.
Put that in a bigger pot?
Well, I wouldn't, not this plant, certainly not yet. There's a fine line. There's a fine line with that, and there's a lot of exceptions. So what I would do is, if you're concerned, look up the particular plant that you're dealing with. I don't want to make a blanket statement because it'll be dangerous, but look up your particular plant. Some plants, like orchids, for example, love being tight. Like you don't want to repot orchids till, I mean, it's like the 9th hour, and they're like all like growing out of the pot and busting out of it. They like it on the tight side. Okay. So, but there are other plants that like a little more wiggle room. Now, if you're wanting a plant to grow faster, okay, you put it in a slightly bigger pot. So when you bump things up, don't put it into a giant pot. There are a few exceptions, but you just want to put it like in the next size up. Because what happens then, there's too much soil and not enough roots. So you're watering it, okay, and then there's so much soil that the roots aren't able to get to, right? And it's going to stay wet longer. And then that can cause problems, okay? So you just want to bump them up incrementally. It can be tempting to take a small plant and put it in a really big pot right away, but then you have, you know, this much root, okay, and then all this soil, you water it adequately so it runs out the bottom, and then all that soil where the roots aren't touching is going to stay wet for a long time because they can't get it, can't get the moisture, and it's going to stay wet too long. So that's why it's important too, if you're dealing with tall pots, like some that are more vertically oriented, you put a lot of gravel. Okay, so like when people buy these big pots that we sell, I recommend a couple bags of gravel in the bottom, and you can take old water bottles, put the caps on them, use some filler, and then some soil. And there's a lot of variables to that as well. But you can put some filler in if you're working with really big pottery for plants, especially if you're just like putting like little flowers. The roots are never going to grow down 3 feet. They're going to be within the top 12 inches of the soil, and that's all the soil they really need. Okay, so you can literally have all fill in a pot this size and just have like a foot of soil on the top, and they'd be happy. Do you have a follow-up question?
Yes. I have a fuzzy, velvety leaf succulent.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in a pot. And I can lift that little puppy right out of that pot.
Right.
All nice and contained. I see no visible roots.
Mm-hmm.
But that is like, it's like a little cube.
Right.
What's going on with
Well,
that? Is it
okay.
happy?
No, so when you guys buy young succulents from us, just know that not too long ago they were just cuttings off of another plant. So I went to a trade show in Fort Lauderdale this winter, And this one farm, a greenhouse, they have a massive complex. Their display was not potted plants. They had these cool little drawers and chests just full of all of the cutting, all the succulents without roots. And it was so beautiful. They had like 100 of one like echeveria and 100 of another type and 100 and it's this cool, colorful display they made, but it's just cuttings. Okay, so that's where they start. So the propagation in the industry of this, and succulents in particular, is they're all propagated by cuttings. Okay, so they're not grown by seed. That's a very long road with succulents. Okay, much faster to do cuttings and propagate that way. So from the point from which I bought them to the point they get to you, they have not been growing roots for very long. Okay, so there's probably only a few roots in that pot. Okay, so also keep that in mind with these little succulents that you're buying. They may only have 2 or 3 roots. If you keep them wet, one root's going to rot. Now they're down to 3. Another root rots. Now they're down to 2. Another root rots. Now they're down to 1. Okay, and once that last root's gone, they're going to be done. They have no way to absorb all that moisture that's staying around them. Okay, now the longer you keep them alive, the more roots they have, and then they'll be more forgiving of staying wet for too long, for example, or other types of stress issues. But the succulents, these little guys, they're cute, they're inexpensive, but they're young. I mean, they were just a cutting maybe several months ago. Okay, so what you can do to speed that up, perhaps, is you could fertilize them with the fertilizer I have inside with the higher middle number. I also have a root stimulator product, you know, so you can jumpstart getting those roots growing faster. And when you fertilize them, you can use that formula because it has a little bit higher middle number that can help with root production.
So do I need to chip it out of the block of soil that it's in? Or just
I probably wouldn't mess with it.
No?
I probably wouldn't mess with it for a while. Yeah, I would, So back to the repotting. Let me get back to that because it is important to repot your plants. So it's kind of like a 2 to 3 seasons, 2 to 3 years ballpark. Depends on how fast the plant's growing. I mean, root bound is another variable, but just to refresh the soil, I'd say 2 to 3 years or so. If you start with a premium potting soil, don't buy the cheapest one out there. They last a little bit longer. It's more so about making sure you're keeping nutrients in there, okay? But if you're starting to notice weird discolorations or smells or fragrances that weren't there when you first, it should smell kind of earthy, right? When you open a bag of potting soil, it smells kind of earthy. That's what it should always smell like. So if you're noticing weird colors, crusts on the top, and any smells or fragrances,
What is the white crust?
well, that's probably calcium buildup from our tap water. There's a lot of calcium in our tap water. So probably staying too wet, or it's just time to get fresh. But the calcium does build up, and it's a lot of times the calcium crust is on the top, on the surface. Okay, now, so the whole idea about bonsai, you all probably heard about, and I said I was going to finish, so I'm sorry. So if you guys need to go, please, it won't hurt my feelings. But just another concept to keep in mind, because so plants can almost live indefinitely in a way, because in nature, plants grow in the ground. Their roots are generally undisturbed, barring a traumatic event, and so they have a finite lifespan, okay? However, if you were to take this tree out of the ground, root prune it, put it back in, and it grows new roots, that extends its life by growing new roots, okay? So in nature, the tree or the plant will have about the same amount of mass underground as it does in the top of the branching, okay? They kind of grow in tandem, okay? That's a general rule of thumb. So under the ground, there's about as much mass under the ground in the root system, okay? So, but if you, in bonsai, depending on the species of tree, you take them out every so often, you prune the roots, so that way they don't become root bound, okay, number one, but two, it also extends the life of the tree, and they're gonna grow new roots and they can live a little bit longer. So doing root pruning, if you guys wanna take it to that level, I would do a little bit of reading and a little research and a little trial and error, but a lot of this stuff you just have to just jump in and give it a try, and don't be afraid to kill your plants, because it happens. It's okay. All right, any other questions? All right, thanks a lot, you guys, for listening. You're welcome.